Hey everyone, how you going? My name is Forrester, and in this video, I'm going to go through how I create a preset for the Duality II EZX using Superior Drummer 3. So normally you would load up an EZX in EZdrummer, you'd pull up a premix preset and get going straight away, whether that's tracking or recording. But what I wanted to do is use the sounds from this Duality II EZX and mix it to a mix that I've got going on here and build up my own preset. So I've got a song here called Leave Me for Dead by band Artifas. They've just released a new record, so highly recommend checking that out. So I've got some audio stems from the original mix that I've done. There's a MIDI performance here that's feeding into the Superior Drummer 3 plugin. And there's a few plugins here just on my master just to recreate the mastering that I had on the original mix. Let's just have a listen to this drum sound that we've got, then I'll break down how I've created that preset. So I'm pretty happy with the way those drums have come up. I think it's really complementing the music. It's not exactly the same as the original mix, but it's definitely serving the song quite well. So I took a little bit of a different approach to what I suggested in the previous video I did on the Progressive Foundry, where I suggested that I cycle through the presets and then find a preset that suits the music and then sort of build on that preset from there. I didn't do that with this particular drum mix because I really wanted to become familiar. Well, I was unfamiliar with the way that these drums sounded. And the idea behind EZXs and the presets is that they're ready to go. They're already pre-mixed. You don't really need to do anything to them. You just pull them up and they sound great. So I really wanted to get to understand how these drums were recorded. And so I opted to go for the default preset, which basically has no mixing, there's no routing, and there's no plugins on it at all. So it's just like the raw sounds, the raw microphones. Once I'd sort of heard all the sounds, I sort of went through and chose a couple of the kit pieces, because the cool thing about this EZX is there are quite a few different snare drums you can choose from. I've gone with the Mapex Brassmaster. I found that had a really nice ring to it, which really complemented the song. I've also just slightly increased the pitch on that particular drum as well, just sort of sat at the right tuning with the music. There are a bunch of different kick drums as well to choose from, but generally the toms are set. There's only one tom sort of option for most of these toms, and the same with the cymbals. A couple of the major crashes have got extra options as well. But so I went through and chose all the appropriate kit pieces for this song, and then sort of looking at building the structure of my mix up in the mixer window. So there are heaps of different microphones available in this EZX. That's really cool. A big fan of lots of microphone options, as you can tell from the Progressive Foundry. But what I like to do with most of my drum mixing, whether it's in Superior Drummer 3 or doing real drums, is I definitely like to use subgroups to do the bulk of my mixing. So what I've done for this particular preset is I've routed all the microphones to a particular subgroup depending on what they are. Obviously the kick in and the kick front are going to the kick in subgroup. Kick out and the kick sub are going to the kick out subgroup. The snare microphones are all going to a snare subgroup, toms to toms. All the cymbals are going to the overhead subgroup, and all the room microphones going to the room. And this just allows me an efficient way of pulling a drum sound quite quickly, rather than focusing in on trying to manipulate and EQ and compress all the individual microphones. I just rather rely on their individual characteristics, get a blend of them together, and then send them to this subgroup for overall processing. I find that's a much more efficient way of mixing drums. So let's just have a listen to these subgroups and see how they sound. And I might just bypass the effects that are on them. We can hear the change from the raw sound to the processed sound. So as you can hear, there's a pretty distinct difference between the raw sound and the processed sound. Now, I might just solo each of these individually and we can have a listen to the exact changes that are going on just to show you how different it really is. So a little bit tighter, fatter, less mids, and a bit of extra top end as well. Okay, listen to the kick out. So definitely just tightening up that low end. That one's got the kick sub microphone going to it, so I'm definitely controlling that. I'd prefer for this particular song like a tight, punchy kick drum rather than a loose, slappy one. The snare drum's definitely going to have a fairly distinct change. I'm definitely going to be trying to bring out the body of the snare, bringing out the ring and sustain in that snare drum because I really like the ring from that particular snare that I've chosen. It's pretty straightforward there. Toms are going to have a bit of a scoop in the mid-range. I don't need to play those. So the overheads, let's just have a listen to what they're doing. So you can really hear the smoothness that this processing is bringing to those cymbals, and I think it's also bringing it to the snare drum and the kick drum that are actually bleeding through as well. So definitely trying to notch out some of the nastiness around 3K, 9, 10K, reduce that harshness that you get from cymbals. There's a bit of a shelf at 10K. There's some compression. Doing about 2 to 3 dB of compression on those overheads, and then some more broad EQs in that sort of harsh frequency range as well, and some of that mids. The next one I've got is the room microphones, and these should be changing pretty significantly. Mainly through the addition of this room reverb that I've inserted on the room microphones. I want to make the room sound a little bit bigger. I think it's more appropriate for this song. I think I'm also trying to chase a little bit of the drum sound that I had originally for the song, which had a big reverb on it as well. But I think this works quite well in providing a cool vibe for those dry or the sort of direct subgroups from the microphones. So let's just have a listen to those again. So yeah, adding that reverb to those rooms definitely creates a vibe. And I'll just draw attention quickly to a really cool sounding microphone. I think I really love the sound of this microphone in these rooms. We've got this ambient ceiling microphone. I've put a bit of squash on it. I might just turn off that those effects there. That sounds really cool. Really dig that microphone to sort of point that out. Okay. So after our subgroups, we've got then some extra effects and processing here. And I find the purpose of these extra effects are really to enhance and add more character and vibe to the drums, especially when you're blending the drums in with the music. Like on solo, all these subgroups sound fine. It sounds like a nice clean drum sound. You can hear everything, no problems at all. But when you blend it in with a mix, you start to lose all the detail and all the things that make the drum sound good. So these are trying to hype those effects and reintroduce those characteristics of the drums in a dense rock mix. So the first up, I've got the transient plugin, and that's just adding in some attack. So what I find is, just naturally through all the compression that I'm adding on, I am adding on compressors on the bus and master here, and obviously there's limiting going on the master of the song. So this transient plugin is sort of reintroducing those the front of the drums, the attack, the transient, to put that back in there, where it might be being taken out by limiters and such. Next up is the reverb. Now, this is on top of the reverb that I've added to the room microphones. So this is being sent from, it's receiving sends from the snare drum, the toms, the overheads, and the rooms. Plus, I'm also sending from the China and the stack spot microphones. And the reason being is I think they were sort of too dry, just solely going from the overhead subgroup. I really wanted to add extra space around that China because it plays a really important role in this particular song. If I just go to this riff section, we can really hear how important the China is. So you can just hear that little bit of extra reverb on the China, just gives it its own space, makes it a little bit more important in the mix. Next up is the drum distortion, and that's being sent from the snare group and the toms group. Now this should just be adding a little bit extra body and maybe a little bit more focus on the snare drum and the toms when they're being hit. Yeah, for me, that definitely just pushes the snare drum a little bit more forward into the mix. I think it also helps with bringing up some of the ghost notes of the snare as well. Next one along of these extra effects is a snare distortion, specifically trying to bring out the mid-range ring and that sort of characteristic of this particular snare that I really like. So this particular distortion is really good at that. Let's just have a listen to that one. I've got a tiny bit of kick drum going there as well. So that's just really pumping up those mids, bringing out that character, and I've blended that in just a little bit. It's arguably reintroducing some of the mid-range that I might have lost by some of the EQ and processing I've got on the snare group. And I'm also sending it to some reverb to the reverb as well. So that's just really trying to bring out that vibe from the snare in the mix. I'll show you what that sounds like when I bring that up and down in the mix. So it doesn't want to be too loud. Obviously, it gets a little bit silly when it gets up too loud, but just a subtle amount of that, and it just sits the snare nicely in that mix. So I'll just quickly draw your attention to the routing, which I think is quite important. So these 6 subgroups that I've got receiving all the microphones from the mix are being sent to this drum master here. Whereas all these effects, the reverb, the transient, and the distortions, are just going straight to the overall master of the plugin. So while I am doing some compression and limiting on this sort of stuff, it's not interacting with any of these effects. So it's just controlling the direct source of these subgroups. So I've got the Punch Exciter, which is one of my faves. Let's just have a listen to what that one's doing. I can't speak more highly of this plugin. It just does the right things for drums, so just check it out. So you can hear how that just really brings out the top end and the excitement. It's just got the right amount of compression, just adding punch to it. It's a great plugin. I really love it on my drums. So there's that one, and I'm also doing it just the smallest amount of limiting just to control these subgroups. It shouldn't really be more than 1 or 2 dB of limiting on this particular limiter. And then the EQ that I've got on there is adding just a little bit of mid-range to just give those drums some vibe there. And that's all just controlling the subgroups. So next up is the overall master, and this, you can think of this as like just the overall sound of my drums, and just sort of finally packaging and getting ready for mixing with the music. So things that I've got going on here are a slow compressor, just subtly mixed in. Like, I really don't want too much of that. I'm not trying to compress things for vibe or sound. It's just more control at this stage. I've got an EQ that's just rolling off some of those unwanted sub frequencies that are just unnecessary down below sort of 30 hertz, so 30, 40 hertz. So that's just controlling anything that comes out at the end of this plugin. And lastly, I do have a limiter on these drums as well. And this is a faster limiter than what I had on the drum subgroup. So this one, again, just controlling, shouldn't really be more than 2-3 dB max on probably snare hits. There is one other thing I want to touch on in this video just real quickly is the use of these macro controls. So you can mix your entire drums just from this plugin by using these macro controls, because these are automatable in all DAWs. So you can assign whatever it is that you want to these macro parameters, and there's 100 of them. And this enables you to then automate those parameters. There should be 100 of these, yep. And then you can use your DAW to control the level of those. So if you just want the reverb to duck in the verse, let's just try that. So for example, we can add this reverb fader to macro number 4 down here, and we can call it reverb. Let's call it room reverb so we know exactly what we're controlling. There we go. And this then controls that fader, and we're able to automate this particular knob if we go to parameter 4. There we go. And in our DAW, we can open up that lane for parameter 4, and we can tighten up the reverb just in the verse section. There we go. Now, the great thing about these macros is you can actually add multiple parameters. So we might also want to add the room sound to this room reverb. So we can bind this to macro 4 as well. And if we go into the options here, we can see that there's volume for the reverb that we originally chose and the room reverb. We can also set upper and lower limits, which is really handy if you know that you don't want to go past a certain level. So we don't want our room reverb or our reverb or our room mics to go past a certain level, because otherwise it'll be too dry. We can also put the upper limit as well. And this just gives us a little bit more detail in the control of those particular automations. So really handy feature. Again, you can assign over 100, or you can assign 100 of these macro parameters. So a really good way to be able to mix everything within the Superior Drummer 3 plugin. So hopefully that gives you a bit of insight into how I use the Superior Drummer 3 plugin to mix EZXs. If you enjoyed this video and you want me to make more, then please leave a comment below.
Burn me again.